However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Coffee and UFOs. I am very excited to be back with a very special guest tonight. We have Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell, who is an expert on autism and savant syndrome, a neuroscientist, psychologist, and has been featured very heavily, a major influence on the recent popular Telepathy Tapes podcast. She's also the author of the ESP Enigma. I know many of you out there have heard about her and you're looking forward to tonight. So thank you. And I look forward to your questions and comments in the chat. As a friendly reminder, this podcast is rebroadcast on the UnX network every Thursday night, 11 p.m. Pacific time, 2 a.m. Eastern time, Friday mornings. And if you want to find out about upcoming episodes for Coffee and UFOs, you can find me on X at paranormal_now, Blue Sky at Coffee and UFOs, and Instagram at Coffee and UFOs podcast. And I'm going to get right to it because I'm very excited and we have limited time with our guest tonight. Dr. Powell, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. Within the broad, I'll say, paranormal, supernatural community, you are highly respected because you bring legit grounded science and research to the study of psychic phenomena. And, we'll get to the telepathy tapes, which was really fascinating, listening to the first 10 episodes about non-speaker autistics who evidently seem to have the ability to communicate psychically. But before we do that, a little bit, can you tell us about your background and how you got to become a scientist?
Well, I grew up in a family of scientists. My father he had graduate degrees in 3 different branches of science and was the head of the artificial heart program at Battelle Memorial Institute. He was one of the principal scientists who helped to end the testing of nuclear weapons in the wild. So my earliest memories were actually at Hanford when he was working with plutonium. And yeah.
No contamination on the way home from work, I suppose.
Yeah. And so I was playing with science kits as a little kid.
Yeah.
Building, crystal radios and soldering electronics and whatnot, and read the book Flatland when I was only about 7 years old. And that's a book that talks about dimensionality.
It's basically the 2-dimension is the premise, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So if you live in a two-dimensional world, then how would you experience 3 dimensions? And so it opens up that door of, well, what would another dimension look like? And that's really a lot of where science is today, is we have to think about, multiple dimensions, because I think that in order to understand reality, most scientists would agree that you have to evoke other dimensions, and the mathematics leads us there as well.
Yeah.
So I was raised with science. That was my way of making sense of the world, and people assumed that I was going to become either a physicist or a mathematician, but I was really most interested in living systems, and particularly in behavior. And so I studied animal behavior, then neuroscience, and then went on to medical school because it was really human consciousness that I was most interested in. And when I was in medical school, it was really that sort of overlap between neurology and psychiatry, sort of the phenomenology of psychiatry, where you had people who were describing having these experiences that most of us don't have, with what neurologists knew about the brain. And I decided that, and then neuroimaging was coming on board. So I thought, well, that is the way that I want to approach this. And very early on in my career, while I was still in training, I met Oliver Sacks, who had just recently written a book about autistic savants. And I realized that there were these individuals who, for reasons we didn't understand, could access information that just appeared to them. It's like a download, that they just had information. And we didn't understand it. And the the way that I am as a scientist is that I realize that the way that you really make breakthroughs in science is to go and explore those mysteries that we know are real, but we just don't understand. So ever since 1986, that's been my field.
I resonate with that very much. I think most people in the UFO community do as well. Oftentimes, whatever evidence is available is critiqued, flippantly by debunkers, and they miss out on what you're talking about. That the mystery of of the circumstantial evidence behind the circumstantial evidence, because you have to start somewhere, right? I mean, most big breakthroughs, it seems to me, start from just a hunch or an idea based on loose evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of the most exciting discoveries in science at first are really actually thought to be just, I mean, the scientist gets put down. It just doesn't get accepted at all. I mean, and there's just countless stories like that. I mean, Galileo is probably the most famous one.
Sure.
And so that still continues today. And I really I was fully anticipating that although I was going into this fringe area, I may never see it get accepted within my lifetime. I still felt that that my compass was correct, that I was really heading for truth in my discovery process. And what's been really remarkable to me is that over the last several years, I see that we're closer and closer to a tipping point in which I think that the dominant paradigm that science has been operating under is about to shift, because there's just too much evidence that goes against it.
There was a period where you were discouraged, though, no?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, not just discouraged, but shot down. And,
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing to discourage you like getting shot down. But
Why were you shot down?
Somebody with my credentials,
Mm-hmm.
Johns Hopkins trained MD, former Harvard faculty, neuroscience background, saying that these phenomena that we call ESP could be real, that is extremely threatening. Because, I mean, I'm in the profession, I've been in the profession as a psychiatrist, that is the one that labels people as psychotic and therefore in need of being put on an antipsychotic if they make such claims. And so to have someone like me say that these things might actually be real is particularly dangerous, more dangerous than it is for a physicist or even a psychologist.
So if somebody goes to a psychologist and says, I'm seeing things that I think are from the future or the past, or I think I can remote view something in a distance, or I'm hearing thoughts, I'm pretty sure I can read, some people's minds. Shouldn't they still run them through psychological tests before just jumping to the conclusion that there's something wrong with them?
Well, you would hope so, but that's not the way the dogma is.
Even today.
Yeah, I mean, you're just like people in neuroscience are told that the brain creates consciousness, and that's an assumption, but we're told it as a fact, just plain out. We know this. Don't even question it. That's like questioning 1 + 1 = 2. So people, you're young when you're in college and you're being told these things. I mean, you're even told these things before college, but you're certainly still young in college when you're having that reinforced. And so you just don't think otherwise. And similarly, when you're in training and you're being told, well, if somebody tells you they can do this or this or that, that's a sign that they're mentally ill. And once again, you don't get into medical school if you're somebody who says you have those experiences. So
Which is why you end up with a lot of scientists like Dr. Gary Nolan, who waited till way later, decades into his career, before he started talking about his childhood experiences.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where even if you've had those experiences, you cannot tell people that you have, because you would totally lose your credibility as a scientist.
Right. So you have to live a lifetime, prove yourself that you're sane, prove that you can accomplish things, and then you can come out and say something when it's a little bit safer, well beyond your tenure, I suppose.
Right, but even then, it's dangerous. I mean, here you had John Mack, who was just down the hall from me when I was at Harvard at
Hmm.
Cambridge Hospital, and they tried to take away his tenure. And he wasn't saying he had those experiences. He was just saying that he had evaluated all of these cases of people
Yeah.
who claimed to have been abducted, and he didn't think they were mentally ill. That was enough for Harvard to try to go after his tenure. And tenure is something that usually is not touchable.
Well, and he was also esteemed and respected at the time, up until that point.
Yes.
Uh, the Telepathy Tapes podcast, how's that affected you? Because that, I think, had really blown up, and a lot of people are now tuned in to the potential reality and supportive evidence for psychic phenomena.
Well, I mean, it's affected me in some ways, and in most ways, it hasn't. I mean, I've been doing this research for 13 years,
And I've been
and
there, done that, right? Yeah,
yeah, it was sort of like, what took everybody
yeah,
so long, kind
right,
of,
right.
or where I've been at, and so, yeah, but people now, I mean, see what an amazing sort of phenomena I've been looking into, which
Yeah.
I have been wanting to get funding to do research, and it's just like, and the funding just hasn't been there. So I've been self-funded. And
Mhm.
so now I have people who want to collaborate with me and research. And I also have, I've over the past 13 years, I've had lots of people. I mean, well over 60 families from all around the world contact me, telling me that they had recently discovered that their child could read their mind, and they did a search on the internet and they found my name, and then they contacted me. And
Yeah.
um, but so I've had more of those people contact me, um, but I'd say that in general, my world hasn't changed that much, except for now, every day I'm getting a podcast interview request.
But what might be I know what might be normal for you is not normal for other people and very new for other people. So can you explain what the when you started to consider that there was something particularly special about autistic people and psychic phenomena?
So when I wrote my book, The ESP Enigma, which was published in 2008,
Mhm.
I one of the things that I did in that is I talked not only about how uh, the model within neuroscience was so incomplete that it didn't really explain anything, and it also didn't rule any of these things out as possible.
Mhm.
And I also talked about how, in fact, physics from over a century ago basically makes it quite possible that these things could happen. It's just that we're interfacing with a reality at one level,
Mhm.
that at both the micro and the macro level,
Yeah.
it's a totally different
Yeah.
world. The world of quantum mechanics is extremely mysterious. I mean, if you look at just looking at an atom, I mean, it's predominantly space, and yet we think of the things as being more solid than they are. We
Mhm.
think of time as being something that moves in an arrow, because that's how we experience it. But we know that really our experience of time is an illusion.
Well,
Uh,
except for those of us who grew up with Back to the Future, we know better.
yeah,
But there's also like in your book you write about spooky action at a distance. You talk about the double slit experiment where subatomic particles can behave both like a particle or a wave versus whether it's observed or not observed or detected or not detected. Um, and so and the thing is, like you said in your book, that theory was put together with Einstein and I forget someone else, the thought experiment for that. And it wasn't until 1984 that there was actually like an equation that made sense of it, or something along those lines. What was the trajectory of that weird exploration of quantum physics?
It's just basically when you look at when you look at reality at that level, you know that, for example, you have to have, if two particles come out of the same um, reaction, okay, that there has to be a complementarity, that you can't have one of them, you can't have both of them having a spin that's up, for
Yeah.
example. It's like they always have to have opposite spins. And so then the thought experiment was, if you altered the spin of one of them, okay, well, now what does that do? Does that defy that rule? No, what happens is the spin of the other one is automatically,
And these are entangled particles.
they're entangled, and it's because they really are still part of the same system. They can't operate independently. And so that was the thought experiment, and then it was experimentally proven true.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Einstein was actually not real happy about that, because he's like, well, that's really spooky.
It's bizarre, right? Yeah.
That's
Well,
just
yeah.
you know, to even think about. And so that's the world of, that's the world that, 100 years ago people were talking about. And here you had people say, well, these things that you've had all cultures across all of history have said have happened, and somehow those things are impossible.
Yeah.
Things like precognition, you have all these prophets in the Bible, or people that had precognitive dreams, or or telepathy, or so all of these different things are supposed to be impossible and absolutely signs of mental illness if you say that you experience them. And so that was the world that I was in writing my book, that I was trying to challenge and just say, hey, wait a minute here. This doesn't defy science, science as I understand it. And then I thought about autistic savants who have this ability to know things that they were never taught. I mean, how is it that you can have these children that just perceive multiple digit prime numbers spontaneously? They don't derive them. And they were even exceeding the computational capacity at the time. I mean, how is that possible? Or how is it that children can not even ever have gone to school and be taught math, be able to solve mathematical equations, or speak languages that they were never taught? And so I thought, well, isn't that in the same ballpark? And so I thought, if anybody could do these things, it would probably be somebody who's an autistic savant, and in terms of these things like ESP. And then another reason that I thought that was that a lot of people can have these ESP experiences, precognition, or like, knowing when, say, a loved one died, and they know it because they dream about it. Yeah. So there's something unique about dreaming sleep. And I thought, well, maybe the modality that are, think of it as a different MO, okay? That when we're in our waking life, we have one MO that we're operating under. And then when we're in our dreaming life, we're operating under another MO. And it's like they have a different set of rules. I mean, in our waking reality, we have all of these beliefs about what's possible. But in our dreaming reality, we can experience all kinds of things that, we're taught in our waking life are not possible. We can fly, we can see, a being with 3 heads, and 1 eye, we can all kinds of things, because we're not judging, what is possible. And I thought it was really interesting that during dreaming sleep, that people can have these experiences that we would label ESP, people who don't think of themselves as psychic. And then I thought about other conditions in which people can have those experiences. And I kept finding the same brain pattern over and over again, that it was more likely to happen in people who have reduced frontal lobe activity, which is the case with dreaming sleep. And also if they're more right hemisphere dominant than left hemisphere.
That's interesting you said that, because you're saying when you're sleeping, you're getting reduced frontal
Mhm.
lobe activity. And then you also mentioned in the book that there are certain people who had like parts of the brain that were um, damaged for some reason, underdeveloped. And I think the prefrontal cortex was one of those, and yet they still were able to live their life and learn things and function and have abilities.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, well, you can have people who, like, for example, develop savant skills who have a dementia where their frontal lobes are actually deteriorating. And then
Yeah,
all of a sudden, now they have these abilities they didn't have before. Or these people that get struck by lightning or have a, severe concussion
yeah,
that have these abilities. And so I was really interested in what makes these people different. And I kept coming back to a certain brain functionality that I saw over and over again. And when I thought about, well, who is it that might have that brain functionality even when they're in waking life?
hmm,
And it's the autistic individuals. I mean, most of their deficits are left hemisphere. Most of the savant skills are right hemisphere based. And if you're talking about children, their frontal lobes are not as well developed. And so I thought those would be the best candidates to prove psi. And after I put
yeah.
that hypothesis out there, I started having people contact me say, yeah, you're right. I mean, I've observed this. I haven't told anybody, but this is what I've seen. And so,
Yeah.
um,
Well, I was going to ask, if is there a connection then between the lack of activity when you're sleeping in a certain part of the brain and the ability to waken up that part of the mind, the imaginative dream state part of the mind, where psychic abilities seem to be able to sort of manifest? Uh, is it like the pressure that forces some other part of the brain to kind of wake up? Some, because, like, for instance, like you said, in autism, uh, like socially, they're unable to relate very well with people because people are unpredictable or whatever it is, and so there's that social barrier. And does that force their brain then to go inward and then develop these inherent abilities that we have?
well, the way I would put it is that, I mean, the left hemisphere is inhibitory towards the right hemisphere. And so damage to the left hemisphere, which a lot of these non-speaking autistic individuals have, because I mean, that's the nature of why they can't speak, is that there's been some damage to the Broca's area, which is
Okay.
involved in the expression of language. So they still understand language. They just have the difficulty in expressing it.
Sure.
Um, and so they have less inhibition of the right hemisphere. Um, and Broca's area is in the frontal lobe. So they also have less of the inhibition that the frontal lobes put on the rest of the brain, which the frontal lobes are, they're involved in sort of expectations. What do you expect to happen? Thinking of the consequences
uh,
of
okay.
something, cause and effect. And so and the left hemisphere is more involved in analytical thinking. So if you take away expectations and logical thinking, then you get into the world of imagination.
Hmm.
The world of imagination is also, and the more creative part of us is also that which can actually experience these things that um, may be just as real. They're just in a different layer of reality.
Yeah. Are you going to be talking about this at the Contact in the Desert in 2025? Or do you
I'm,
have a different presentation?
well, I'm going to be talking there about these individuals and their ability to access things that are outside of this reality. Whether you're talking about interdimensional beings or the Akashic records, and what it is that I think that they have to tell us about that.
Interesting. All right. So I have a couple questions in comment. I want to get them in now. This is from a friend of mine, Mariah Kunau. Hey, Mariah. In your current research, do you involve an experiment with established physics and mediums to help you and parents to connect with autistic people, also including nonverbal?
Do I? So, well, I don't have any physicists who are part of it. I mean, I'd be happy to involve a physicist if I knew, kind of what would be the best way to involve them in the experiments. But I'm interested in including mediums. I mean, a lot of these children have mediumship abilities,
Mhm.
reportedly. I mean, the parents have told me, teachers who work with them have told me that they've just spontaneously given them a reading and just said, "Oh, well, there's your grandfather, so and so, in the corner over there,
Yeah.
telling me to give you this message," and they're like, "Whoa!" And so I think it'd be really interesting if we could have a medium there independently providing the same information. That
Okay. Yeah.
that
That
would be really very
that'll
interesting.
be very interesting. That's corroborating right there.
Right, right.
Yeah.
If I had them there and we just said, "Okay, just, anybody who shows up, just write it
Mhm.
all down and, let us know," and then
Yeah.
you compared notes. If they were, like, the same, I mean,
Yeah.
that would be phenomenal.
Yes. And Mariah, I know is quite extraordinary as a psychic medium, and she was on the Netflix series Surviving Death. And I've spoken to Mariah, and I have friends that do these things, uh, and interviewed Tyler Henry, which I'm sure you probably know, and it is and like an awe and wonder when they are able to recall this information out of seemingly nowhere. And that's the question of like, it can't be out of nowhere, right? So where is that information coming from? How are other consciousnesses and data, crossing into our minds so that we can receive this information?
Right. Yeah, where is the information? I mean,
Right.
that
Yeah.
really interests me. I mean, is because I think of our brain and our body, because our body has all kinds of receptors for information as well. We're not just getting the information. So I see the brain as being really what is our navigational tool. So for exploring consciousness or exploring information. So it's sort of like if you think of information as existing in some kind of cloud,
Okay.
and then our brain and our body is
Mhm.
our means of navigating that, surfing it.
Well, okay. So what do you think the cloud is?
Well, that's a good question. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean,
Because I imagine you would speak to people like, nonverbal, people that have reported what they've seen or what they might think.
yeah. Well, so I mean, in terms of, putting it in scientific terms, I
Mhm.
would think of the cloud as being like the quantum vacuum or the 0 point energy field.
Okay.
Yeah, it's and
It's
so
it's like it's like a matrix in a sense. Is that how do we imagine that?
think of it as like a blockchain. Okay,
Okay. Yeah.
it's like a blockchain
But it's
that's
more reliable than Bitcoin.
reliable,
Right.
more reliable than Bitcoin.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
much more reliable than Bitcoin.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Is there a like visual sense of do people report, for instance, near death experiences, right? People see different things. There's a lot of parallels, but some people report very, very different visuals from the other side.
Yeah, and the way that I think about that is that I think of I agree with Tesla, who said that everything is energy, frequency, and vibration.
Mhm.
And within that, you have information that can be transmitted. I mean, that's like what we're doing right now. All of the information that is in my voice and the information that's in my image,
Mhm.
it's all being transmitted by sound, which is
Yeah,
vibration, and light, and the pixels and the patterns that are created.
right. Like
With
I'm looking at you, but you're not really there. Right?
Right,
It's so
and
if you
and
really
so
break it down, it's interesting. Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, and so that's sort of how I see it, is
Yeah.
that, you know, that we live in a, we live in a universe in which we know that there's vibration
Hmm.
because things are moving. You know, we
Yeah.
were told that even at, you know, the micro level, you know, string theory says everything's vibrating, you know, so there's vibration at multiple levels. Okay. And we know there's light, and we know that there's light that's not just in the visible spectrum, but light that's in outside of our visual spectrum.
Right.
And all of that has the capacity to contain information.
Mhm. I'm
And
gonna ask. Oh, go ahead.
well, and so one of the things we know about autistic individuals is that they have extraordinary sensory capacities. They're much more sensitive to light and sound than we are,
Yeah.
and I suspect that that expanded capacity is also part of what gives them this other ability as well.
Yeah. I think one of the I forget the person's name, but one of the more tragic, not tragic, but horrifying things to imagine is that in the telepathy tapes there was a someone who her I think it was her daughter, or no, it was her son. The doctors were telling her like he's shut down, and like this is in the 90s, like he's shut down, that's it, he's lost, he's gone. And she kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting to find a way to kind of communicate with him. And I can't imagine the thousands and thousands of people who've had this horrible experience of people, because they can hear you know, autistic people can hear you and perceive you, they understand,
That
like,
it
and they're treated as if they're, you know, unintelligent or not there.
Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the things that really, it's something that has really, you know, been heartbreaking for me for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, to see, because the thought of being misunderstood like that, the thought of being treated the way they do, and
Yeah.
so many of them are so highly intelligent, and yet they're treated as though they are, you know, perennial 3 and 4 year olds. It
Right.
just based on the fact that they have bodies that don't really, cooperate very well, and they're being judged by that. Um, but, yeah, you know, I wanna say that it's not just in the thousands. In
Mhm.
America alone, there are there's 5 million people who've been diagnosed with autism,
Yeah.
and 1 out of 4 are non-speaking.
Mm.
So that means there's well over 1 million children in the United States alone who fall into that category of being non-speakers. And then the question
Yeah.
is, how many of them are being misjudged in that regard?
Sure. And even for those parents that do care, I mean, it's got to be stressful, and they I'm sure they pick up on that stress even when the parents try to hide it. So, but now there's this. We do have a way of communicating, right? I know science has questioned it, but this the tapping or the typing. Um, can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what most of these children have is a sensory motor issue where they
Mhm.
don't really know where their body is in space. And so they, for example, if they were if they were to close their eyes, they wouldn't be able to touch their nose with their finger. Okay, because that requires that you have that sense, which
Yeah.
is where all of your body parts are. And we all take it for granted. We don't even think about it most of the time.
Yeah.
And so they're lacking that. And so as a consequence, so that's one of the things they're missing. They also don't have great vision, in terms of, a lot of them see double vision, and they don't have good motor feedback to be able to do things. So what's happened is that they don't even know where their tongue is in their mouth to be able to speak very well. So all of the things that you need to be able to communicate
Yeah.
are not very, they're just not functioning very well. So what happened was is that this woman named Soma, who had an autistic son who's now in his mid 40s, she came up with this method where she would teach the child how to communicate by pointing to letters.
Hmm.
And she made the letters big enough so that the child would be able to it would be using more of a gross motor rather than a fine motor skill in order
Okay.
to touch it.
Mhm.
And then basically doing occupational therapy with the child so that they get better and better so that you can have more letters, and that the letters can be smaller, and then
Yeah.
eventually getting them to a letter board like this, where they can then point to the letters to communicate. And
Is that similar to something like how people recover from strokes?
well, yeah, it's similar to how when people recover from strokes, they undergo a lot of speech therapy and occupational therapy just to
Hmm.
regain those skills. The problem is that if you lose the ability to communicate by language before the age of 2,
Hmm.
then people don't assume you have the ability.
Right. Right. Does your brain, are we wired in certain ways as we grow up and we become adults? Can some nonverbal people still learn to speak?
Well, yeah. So what's remarkable with a lot of these children is that when they learn how to spell,
Hmm.
they're really mainly learning how to be able to point to the letters, and then they quickly are at the level that a child of that age would be at. I mean, it's like, well, wait a minute, nobody ever taught them how to spell that word. I mean,
But they've been watching and listening this entire time.
they've been watching and
Yeah.
listening the entire time, and who knows, they may have been even tuning into, this, Akashic records, a greater informational field, but somehow they know a lot of this already.
And to be clear, when you say that's what they're saying, right? The nonverbal people are saying, I'm getting this information from some other place. Like it's not always just something that they learned per se.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. They say that they download it. They say that they go to a place called The Hill where
The
they,
hill.
audit it. Um,
But
yeah,
we have to talk about the hill because that's a really fascinating topic. And like I was saying, I'm on episode 11, or just moved on to episode 11, the talk tapes. And there was a non-autistic person talking about how he was able, through some sort of meditation, get to the hill. So what is the hill, and why is it meaningful?
well, the hill is not a physical place. Okay, so I think of it as being like, for lack of better words, maybe on the astral plane.
Okay.
And
Like a point in time, sort of.
it's sort of in a it's not in this dimensional reality. That's another way of putting it.
Okay.
Okay, and so I think of dimensions as being nested. Okay, and so we're kind of locked into it with our embodied perspective. We're locked into this very, 3.5 dimensional world. Three physical dimensions and a half dimension of time, because we think of time as just going in one direction. But the reality is time is bidirectional, and then we have more than those four dimensions.
Hmm.
We can actually and I think many people are moving into a fifth, a five-dimensional world. And so when you're moving into that five-dimensional world, just like with flatland, where
Hmm.
you're going from a two-dimensional space to three-dimensional, it's like, oh, what does that look like? Well, when you're going from four dimensions to five dimensions, that all of a sudden you have access to things that are not accessible otherwise. You would interpret them differently. Um,
Right. And the hill, what makes it exciting is that there seems to be evidence for this phenomena. So what evidence have you seen that, as a scientist, legitimizes that people's minds are somehow meeting psychically in some other place?
Well, I mean, I think that the some of the things, like just the fact that hearing from these two children in Atlanta who said that they would go to the Hill. I mean, that was interesting when I heard that for the first time. But then independently hearing that from other people who hadn't heard about the Hill because the podcast hadn't happened yet, saying that their kids go to the Hill. That's something very interesting. I'm using that same exact word. And then there have been
in different languages as well, or
I'm sorry.
in different languages, or just
These
English?
are all English-speaking people that refer to it as the Hill.
Okay.
But I've heard this from other individuals from different countries who say that they meet up with other autistic kids. I mean, in some non-local space. So they didn't necessarily call it the Hill.
Okay.
But the sense is that they live in, that part of them lives in this other reality.
Yeah.
And they're in communication with others who are in that reality. And what it looks like to them, though, isn't necessarily the same. Just like, and this is getting back to something you asked earlier about, like, for example, near-death experiences. I think the best way to understand it is that there's certain things that, let's say it's an energy that we would associate with love. Okay. Let's say that, like these things have a different vibe to them, a different energy to them. Would you agree with that? Yeah. And so if you were somebody who is raised a Christian, when you encounter that frequency, you're going to put your the imagery that you're going to associate with it is going to be like Jesus, because you think Jesus or an angel is love. It represents that kind of loving presence.
Right. Okay.
But if you come from a Buddhist background, you're going to see Buddha. Okay, and it's really just, to me, it's the symbol that you attach to that energy, that frequency. And it's important to not get too caught up in the symbol itself, but realize, what is it what does that symbol represent? What's the root of that symbol? What's the more basic understanding of that symbol, rather than getting too caught up into the details? It's kind of like, it's all the same thing. It's just the names and details change.
Yeah. Have you ever had the chance to talk to the philosopher and neuroscientist Sam Harris?
No, I haven't.
No. Okay. I think he's really interesting because I think he's intellectually honest. He's a meditator, but he's an atheist, ardent atheist. But he also admits that he doesn't understand where the mind really comes from. Why is it that some scientists have to say it's from the flesh of the brain and that's the end of the story? Or do you think that in the back of their mind, they're thinking something different when they say that?
I don't think when they're saying that they're thinking something different. I think it gets back to what I was saying earlier about what you're taught when you're very young.
Yeah.
It just gets, woven into the fabric of your thought process, such that it's really, you have to really go through something that really changes your thinking that way, because it's like, it just becomes unquestionable. It becomes sort of, it's like people that are raised with a religion from very early on. It's like a lot of it is faith-based, but because they heard it for as far back as they can remember.
Yeah,
it has more of a sense of knowing than it does of faith, and so a lot of neuroscientists are trained. Well, all neuroscientists are trained in the materialist model, and it just assumes that the brain creates consciousness. End of story. And then what happens is that neuroscientists just ignore all of these phenomena that go against that. Yeah. I mean, you can't explain yeah, out of body experiences. You can't explain psychic abilities. You can't even explain savant syndrome, where you know things that you were never exposed to. You can't explain any of that with this idea that consciousness is something created by the brain, and that all of the memories and information that we have access to are just about, reinforced wiring within that.
Right. We have a question from Malcolm Brenner. Miss Powell, I have had the most profound telepathic experiences with a bottlenose dolphin. So have others who have written books about it. Do you know anything about it?
Well, I would love to, I would love to study dolphins. I mean, when you look at them, their capacity, their first of all, just their brains, because it's not that I think consciousness comes from the brain, but I think that's our brain is our processing system for consciousness.
Okay.
And so when you look at a dolphin's brain, it's like two of our brains put together.
But smaller or
No,
no?
no, no, no. It's like I mean, they have big brains, okay? And they and it makes me wonder, what they're capable of. See, we tend to
Yes. Yes.
base, just like people judge the autistic savants based
Yeah.
on the fact that they don't have good sensory motor control, and so they can't use their body, and therefore express themselves in the
Right.
same way as everybody else. Well, dolphins, they don't have hands to build things, and they don't speak our language. And so then,
Yeah.
we're judging their intelligence. What are we judging their intelligence on? It's, and so I think that they are highly evolved, highly advanced beings. And I don't think of telepathy as being something that is only within the same species. There's a lot of evidence for cross-species telepathy.
In the telepathy tapes, there are a number of experiments that Kai was doing, and you were a part of, where you essentially would ask the person who has autism to either see something, or to share some information that was blocked, like behind a screen or what have you, and they could do it. And that's what's really fascinating to me. So I'm just waiting for this to like blow up, right? Like in the scientific community, like where's the funding to fund this stuff? And it's interesting because with all that evidence, it suggests that um, autistic people have this inner world beyond the physical world, and now you're talking about the dolphins, and I really do wonder then, do they have this whole other inner world that we have no clue about? Like a whole, like a sort of, psychic cosmos that they're living in. And we're valuing their intelligence and experience based on whether they can build rocket ships or not.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, we're very, anthropocentric.
Mhm.
We judge others,
Yeah.
as if we're the center of of everything, and the highest level of intelligence and whatnot. And yeah, I think that's very similar to thinking the Earth is the center of the universe.
Yeah. I mean, but to the benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, we are, or to give ourselves some credit, like we don't know really what consciousness is like outside of our own brains. So we are
Right.
kind of limited in our imagination, I would think. Unless, like, have you ever done a psychedelic or mind altering substance?
No, no,
No.
no, I haven't. I think that I saw too many people like go on
Mhm.
trips they never recovered from. So
Yeah, it can go in different directions. Uh,
it can go in different
I
directions.
testify to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it does have a way of sort of opening up your mind and kind of seeing a world not all that different from some with a near death experience. Kind of see things that you imagine, things you experience, things that you otherwise couldn't in your regular conscious state.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And for me, I'm a very strong empath. And so and what I mean by that, it's easy for me to kind of intuitively enter into the other person's space and
Hmm.
understand what it is they're experiencing. And I think one of the things I found attractive about psychiatry was talking with people who, I mean, would be diagnosed as schizophrenic or, whatever,
Hmm.
bipolar, manic or whatever, and talking with them about their world and, and really entering, well, what do what, just asking them all kinds of questions and listening to them, and trying to understand what it was they experienced. And it was through those kind of vicarious
Yeah.
experiences with individuals that I gained a lot of my understanding. I didn't need to be doing the things myself. It was because I was spending so much time talking with people, trying to just understand the reality that they were experiencing. And it
Right.
wasn't them experiencing it because they took a drug. It was them experiencing it because that's just how they were, their brains were wired or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Is what a good thing or
Is
bad
it
thing?
lucky or unlucky to have that?
Oh, I wouldn't put a label on it like that. I
Okay.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of it is like what you do with it.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of other circumstances, and I mean, and it depends upon what culture you're in. I mean, a lot of these individuals, if
Hmm.
they were in Africa, for example, they would be highly revered as seers, and yet in our country, they would be put on antipsychotics.
I've got a question from Android. He says, Dr. Powell, do you believe the Telepathy Tapes documentary will lead to a major paradigm shift in humanity?
Um, well, I think the podcast is already creating for many people a paradigm shift.
Hmm.
I think the documentary will kick it up another level. And then I think that the research that I'm going to do that continues even after the documentary will hopefully just totally push it over the edge.
Yeah. I can't imagine it not. Seeing things, I think, will make a difference versus listening to the podcast. But like I said, the number of experiments that you did, I mean, it just demands further research and funding and academic funding. Um, do you feel that if that happens, that there is a risk that greed, privatization could somehow hurt individuals, put them in a dangerous place because of the desire to gain from what some of these non-speaking and autistic people are able to do?
Well, yeah. I mean, do you have a more specific thought about what that would look like?
Well, I don't know. I just know that people and are dishonest when they're after money, and maybe they approach people offering money for research, and these children or adults are put into situations that are unethical, at worst amoral.
Yeah. Well,
Should there be protections is what I'm thinking,
oh, well, no, well,
guardrails.
yeah. I mean, there definitely needs to be protections. I
Hmm.
do think that these children are far more protected than most people realize. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, their parents are incredibly protective of them. I mean, so their parents aren't going to let them get involved in anything. But they're also somewhat protected by just the nature of their way of being, because they're so hypersensitive that they won't cooperate with someone if you're not coming from a really good positive vibe. Okay,
Right.
you can't coerce them. I mean, even people like
Yeah.
myself and Kai, who come in and we're very loving and nurturing and caring,
Mhm.
sometimes they just it's just the excitement of having a camera crew there is too much for them, and they can't cooperate.
Yeah.
So they, yeah, and we're very understanding of that and whatnot. But it would go even further south if you had somebody saying, "No, you must do this now," or
Mhm.
whatever. It ain't going to happen. And so that's part of it. But then, in addition to that, I mean, these children are so pure that, I mean, they're not corruptible by money, or they're not looking for anything like that. They're really here with a desire to help humanity,
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
and then what's interesting is that they tell me that they are protected by angels.
Yes, I hear this, and right, and for me as an agnostic, I hear that, and I like to think in terms of how you were talking about symbols. Is that what they mean? Because there are, even with uh, autistic person's experience with protective beings, they're not all angels, right? Like there are some differences.
Oh, you mean in terms of the entities that they
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, they'll definitely tell you that, there's both, negative and positive entities out there.
Well, I guess what I mean is like angels, I think in terms of like a religious.
Yeah, and
Like,
when they're saying angels, they
yeah.
don't mean like, what Christians think of as angels necessarily.
Okay.
But they're really, I think what they're referring to is, they always say that they're beings of light
Hmm.
and that they have this very angelic presence that, that is
Yeah.
just a loving, positive presence. And so, a lot of people would call that angels, but
Hmm.
it's not angels that have names like in the Bible and
Yeah.
necessarily.
Do you think we can, any of us, develop our psychic abilities?
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
What about you? Do you ever practice?
I don't have to practice.
Okay. You're
I
like,
had my moments.
okay.
It's interesting. It's not something I've tried to develop, but what happened is that while I was doing intensive psychotherapy with patients, I
Mhm.
started realizing I knew things about people that they hadn't told me.
No, that's so interesting.
And then I've also had times where I've precognitive, yeah, I've had precognitive dreams. I've had my own experiences, and
Mhm.
a lot of people tell me that they think that I'm very psychic, and that a lot of the counseling I've done is very intuitive guidance for people. So, but I mean, I would, I'm not hanging a shingle out there saying I'm a psychic or anything like
Sure,
that.
sure.
But I do have some of these abilities, but I think that these abilities are innate to all of us, and
Mhm.
it really is a matter of intentionality and practice, um, and and it depends upon what it is you're trying to connect with. With me, I've always wanted to connect with other people. I've wanted
Yeah.
to understand them to help them understand themselves. And so there's a certain merging with something else, someone else or something beside yourself. And
Mhm.
it's like the meditations where they say, become the candle or,
Right.
whatever it is. It's that what you're really trying to do is merge with something outside of yourself. And by doing that, you actually gain a perspective that is outside of that embodied perspective.
Yeah,
That
it's like kinda getting out of your own way.
yes, you're getting
Yeah.
out of your own way. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I have to get this last question in. Uh, do you see a connection between extraterrestrials, UFO phenomena, and psychic abilities?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say definitely. Yeah. I mean, the what people have told me over and over again is that the way that any of these, whether you call them non-human intelligence, the way that any of these entities communicate, it's always telepathically.
Yeah.
And then some of these, UAPs are reportedly not even manned by any entities, that
Mhm.
they have their own consciousness.
Right.
And then you have this whole field of psionics where you have people actually, calling them in, or interacting with them. So yeah, I would say that it's very much involved.
So then is it fair to say you do think extraterrestrials or NHI of some sort, non-human intelligences are visiting or are manifesting UFOs or UAPs in some fashion?
I, I can't, can I say 100% conviction?
Mhm.
But I would say that, to me, that's the preponderance of the evidence. And I've seen it from multiple different sources. I mean, and so to me, that has to be. And then you have all of these scientists who say, yeah, well, look at all of the billions of planets that are out there that we know could sustain life. I mean, and that would be even more advanced than us because they've been around longer. So it to me, why should I discount those stories when you hear them from so many credible people?
Right. Okay. Dr. Powell, if you could leave us with one thought, what would it be? Anything you want.
Any thought at all? Oh my God. Wow. Any thought at all? Well, I would say, let me think. I would say that people really need to learn to tap into these abilities for themselves. They really do, because if you have any doubt, there's nothing like firsthand experience to remove that doubt.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to really this changing this paradigm. It can be a grassroots effort if we all just sort of open up the possibility of these things and try it out. And then once you've had the experience, then it changes everything. Because if you're trying to get there just through your own analysis, or who do I believe? Does she seem credible or does he seem credible? It's harder to get there, so I invite you to try to have your own experiences.
All right. I love it. Last question. Are dragons real?
Well, I have a wyvern on my family crest, so.
Hey, there you go. Nice. We have a cat, so I'm pretty sure dragons are real. All right. Dr. Powell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And if you want to find out more, go to drdianehennessy.com, where you can get her book through her website only. That's correct. Only through the website. Yep. And then if you are interested in going to Contact in the Desert this year, 2025, you're going to get the opportunity to see Dr. Powell there. So, Dr. Powell, thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate your comments and your questions. This is a great conversation. One of the best out there in this field, for sure. If you are a fan of this podcast, please follow on Instagram at Coffee and UFOs Podcast, or on Blue Skies Coffee and UFOs. This podcast is rebroadcast on the UnX network every Thursday night, 11 p.m. Pacific time, 2 a.m. Eastern time on Fridays. Special thanks to Margie K and Race Hobbs from the UnX network. And until next time, everyone, peace and love, and live in the mystery.